And good evening, everybody. And I just realized that Anna and I hadn't discussed how my name is pronounced, which always causes problems. And for the record, the name is Robin Scagell. There you are, Scagell. And my interest in glowworms started many years ago, and I'm going to tell you a bit about glowworms themselves, and then why I started the glowworm survey, and also how in particular you can join in. And there's going to be a call to action, things that you can do to survey the wildlife of your area. And I know that this is also being seen by some people who were involved in the London Wildlife Trust, because a similar project is underway in London. You might think that London is not the best place to look for glowworms, and it's true, it isn't. I'll show you a comparative map later on, but nevertheless there are glowworms even in Greater London. So although there are many more around Cranbourne Chase, there are glowworms to be found almost everywhere in the country. So if you are looking somewhere else in the country, this is just as much for you. But if you're in the Cranbourne Chase area or in the London Wildlife Trust area, then there are people who can get you involved. Okay, so let me start with the presentation about glowworms. Here we go. The scientific name, Lamparis noctiluca, noctiluca meaning night shining. And the glowworm is actually a beetle. Now you can see a little glowworm there, but I'll show you more pictures of it later on. There it is, shining away. And you can see that, in fact, that's probably about life size. If you see it on a computer screen, it's about an inch long, and it's got a couple of glowing bands at the end of its abdomen there. I'll show you some more pictures as we go through. Now, the glowing female is the part of the glowworm's life cycle that we really associate with being a glowworm, and it's the most noticeable stage is actually the adult. But actually, the adult stage only lasts a few days, really. In many cases, probably no longer than 3 or 4 weeks. And most of its lifetime of a glowworm, an individual insect, is spent as a larva. So I'll be speaking a bit about the larval stage as well, and where and if a site is good for glowworms, it's got to be good for the larvae rather than just the adults. Only the females glow, and they do that to attract the males who can fly. And the males in general don't glow. There is a faint glow from them. Whenever I say the males don't glow, someone usually says, oh, actually they do, but you're unlikely to see a male glowing. And if you see something bright flying through the sky, I don't know what it is, but it won't be a male glowworm because they're not that bright. The females glow typically for 1 to 3 hours after dark at this time of the year, in June or July, going into August actually, and sometimes as late as September. In fact, my local sites, I live in the Thames Valley near Marlow, and we have a site here which carries on until September. So you may be lucky, but if you go as late as September, but basically June and July are the time to go. And July is the peak season in the south of England. Curiously, up in the Midlands and North, they're starting to see glowworms already in quite good numbers. A friend of mine in Derbyshire is already getting quite large counts in around the Peak District. Several dozen on some sites. So they are better visible at the moment in the north, but they are also starting up in the south as well. Both of the sexes, as adults, spend their days in crevices and they emerge at night, usually as it just gets properly dark. So you're unlikely to see a glowworm, an adult glowworm, during the day, but it is possible to see the larvae during the day as well, and I'll be showing you how to tell the difference. Now, in June and July, the female glowworm that has appeared and has pupated and become a female, she appears in the same location night after night until she has found a mate, and then she will turn her light off. So this means that all the glowing females that we see are actually the unmated ones, and it's important to remember that. And I wish people knew that bit more, because quite often people will see a female glowworm and say, oh, that would be nice in my garden, I'm going to take it and maybe she will have babies. It doesn't work that way. It takes two. And so if you see a female glowworm, leave it where it is. It knows where it wants to be, and please don't take them and try and put them in your garden. It won't work. It's a much more difficult process than that. Now, the female glowworms will either sit on the ground, to just sort of on the soil, or on the grass stem, and occasionally quite often they will climb up a piece of vegetation, maybe a flower or a grass stem or something like that. I have seen them up to a meter up a grass stem, a really long grass stem, up to a meter. And on one occasion, I even saw one have climbed a telegraph pole, but that is very unusual. Usually they are within about a foot or so of the ground. So don't look for them in trees. If you see them in trees, it's something else, almost certainly a laser projector, which are very common these days, and I'll mention those a bit later on. But you're unlikely to see those out in the countryside, and at this time of year, it's more of a Christmas thing. So
Robin, you've put yourself on mute by accident.
There, that's it. Sorry, I was moving. Yep. So there's a female glowworm, and the reason she's a bit blurred is that, as it says there, she waves her tail slowly to make herself more visible. And this accounts for one of the myths about a glowworm that which you will read and sometimes hear people say, and that is that as you approach them, they will turn off their lights. They don't actually. In fact, the female glowworm can't turn off her glow. She glows through the combination of two chemicals inside her body, which she will mix together, a bit like those glow sticks you get at fairgrounds and so on. And you break the tube, and the two chemicals mix and start the glow. It's a completely cold glow. You won't find them warm or anything like that. But please don't pick them up and meddle with them, because they don't necessarily like being picked up, and they could easily just turn off their lights. Not always, but it's best not to pick one up. If you see one, leave it where it is. And she moves her abdomen from side to side, as you can see with the time exposure there. It's just a 2 or 3 second time exposure. And the reason she does this is so that the male who is flying around will have a better chance of spotting her, because it's very easy for her glow to be hidden behind a grass stem or something like that, or a bit of vegetation. So by moving it from side to side, she can appear to suddenly shine her light out and then switch it off again. It's not that, it's just moving her tail. And so that's important to remember. And quite often you see that you'll be in a group and you'll say, there's one, and everybody else says, can't see it. And then they move around and then they can. Now, some pictures of the glowworms. Here's another picture of the glowing female. And you can see that the lower side of her abdomen, the last two segments have got these glows on. They're quite large and quite bright. People ask me how bright glowworms are. You can actually see them under the right circumstances from as much as 50 meters away. And more often than not, you can be just on a path and walking along, and you'll see one maybe about 10 meters ahead of you. And they really are quite bright, as long as you get an uninterrupted view of the glow. And there is a female on the lower one, the larger one, and the male, which is the one with the wings together. And that's just a set-up shot, I have to say. Normally you wouldn't see them just like that. And the male, as you can see, underneath those wing cases, the elytra are the true wings. You know that when you've seen a ladybird, which is also a beetle, of course, if it's just about to take off and fly, it lifts up the elytra, the red bits on its which are the wing cases, and then its more delicate wings are underneath, and so the wing cases there you can see on the male. Also notice about the male that if you can see my cursor, he's got a sort of a peaked cap on his head, and that this is and so indeed has the female, but this pronotum is quite important for the glowworm, because apart from anything else, it directs his gaze below him rather than above. Why? Well, every 29 days the moon is full, and you don't want your glowworms flying off to the moon, so his view is restricted to downwards, and that is often a good thing, because as we'll say later, they are affected by things like street lights. And there's a mating pair, and after mating the females will retreat below ground, which is where they've been spending their night in some little crevice, and lay 25 to 100 eggs, maybe even more, and they die shortly afterwards. Sometimes they don't die straight away, but they can't mate again, and I've heard stories of them actually tending the eggs and sort of looking after them and making sure that they're okay. But it's normal to see a dead female glowworm with her eggs, and she's completely flat. You see how fat she is there. Once she's laid her eggs, she's just full of eggs there. Once she's laid her eggs, she's almost flat as a sheet of paper. And there are the eggs, and they're about half a millimeter, not as big as a millimeter across, really quite small. And what's more, they even glow. There, that's a nighttime picture of the same eggs, and you can see some of them are glowing there. So they learn to glow even before they are hatched out. So as the eggs develop, after a few weeks, you can see the baby glowworm, the larva, curled up inside the egg, and then they hatch out. And they're only when they've hatched out a millimeter or two long. They look like the full-sized larvae, and they've got 6 legs on the front and all these abdomen segments there, but they are literally only a millimeter or two long. I don't think I've ever seen a larva that small, other than the ones that have been reared in captivity, which people occasionally do, and they normally you don't see them that small in the wild. And there's a variety of different sizes, and they typically have a 2-year lifetime, going through several instars, or that is molting phases, typically 7, and there's a variety of sizes there. The larger one, that's probably getting on for 25 millimeters long, so these others are maybe 10, 12 millimeters long. And there is a young one and a full-size one, but there's no real obvious difference between male and female larvae. So if you see a larva, if it's a big one, then it's almost certainly going to become a female, and they grow up to, as I say, 25 millimeters long. But a small one could be a small female or just a full-size male. You can't tell. Now, they spend that 2 years feeding voraciously on snails and slugs, at which point everyone says, I want them in my garden. But unfortunately, the ability of a glowworm to feast its way through all the glowworms, all the snails in your garden and slugs is limited. So I'm afraid it's not a particularly good biological control of slugs and snails. Sorry about that. The technique that they use is actually, in the case of a snail, is to climb onto its shell, and then you can see it's nipping the body of the snail with its mandibles, and it will inject a paralyzing fluid into the snail. And then when the snail is suitably subdued, it starts to inject enzymes to turn the inside of the snail into a sort of broth. Occasionally, even while being eaten alive, some of the snails will start to recover and crawl along, and at that point they get another nip, and that shuts them up and stops them moving. Not exclusively slugs and snails. Female larvae have been seen feeding on carrion, like dead birds. So it's possible that they are fairly widespread in their diet, but slug snails are the main ones. Fireflies, incidentally, which we don't get in this country, do tend to specialize sometimes in earthworms, but this hasn't been noticed particularly in the UK. The larvae do glow, and if you see a very faint glow, it could be a larva. Now, I took these pictures by giving a time exposure in a reasonably dark site of a larva moving along, and it would light up its glow. It moves quite slowly as it's sort of hunting around for the snails, and you can see these little trails of dots, and those are caused by the brief sort of twinkle of a larva. They tend to glow more in the autumn time, and there's a little story here. If you know about well, obviously William Wordsworth was the great poet. Dorothy Wordsworth, his sister, also wrote diaries, and she lived up in Dove Cottage in the Lake District, and she wrote on occasion that she was a great one for walking at night. She would quite frequently go for 4 or 5 mile walks at night over the fells, and something that no one would think of doing these days. And I checked the nights on which she recorded doing this, and they were nights when there was no moon, so she would have had a lantern. And on several occasions, she said there were glowworms everywhere. And these, funnily enough, were not in the summer months, but in October. So she must have been looking in the really dark conditions of the Lake District in the early 19th century at larvae. So they can be very common to see larvae, and occasionally you will see that even in early autumn, maybe even late summer, which is when they tend to glow more. I've seen larvae sort of glowing everywhere, and I have no idea why it is. On some nights they glow. Why they glow is believed to be that it acts as a sort of warning to predators, a bit like the yellow bands on a wasp, that I'm not good to eat, I'm dangerous. And as I often tell people, well, would you eat something that glowed? So that is intended as a warning that they're bad to eat. And apparently they do taste terrible. Someone wants to try one, but the birds fed them. Once they've eaten one, they don't want another one. So that acts as a guard as well. However, it takes quite a few sacrifices before the birds learn that. So that's why they lay hundreds of eggs, and only perhaps 2 or 3 will survive from one offspring, from one mating. Now they pupate after 2 years, as I've mentioned. So that means that the ones that are hatched later this year, will probably pupate and become adults in 2025 or 2026. Maybe they can go through their sequence in 1 year. Sometimes it might be 3. That's something that's unknown in the wild, because it's not all that easy to mark a beetle that sheds its skin every so often. It's just one of those things that we don't know. And at this time of year, and I'm talking about May and June, and the larvae have mostly stopped walking about now, but they often are seen at this time of year wandering around in daytime during the spring and early summer. Probably they could be several hundred meters from where they were hatched, but we get a lot of reports from the daytime of larvae, usually the big ones, being seen by day as they are brazenly walking about in broad daylight, trying to find somewhere where they can find a nice little crevice to pupate. And they seek out crevices in the soil or in gardens. People often get them in gardens, surprisingly enough, and they might say that the glowworms appear in the wall, and they like crevices. And as I shall say later on, they absolutely love railway lines, and it's the ballast in railway lines which creates good, damp and well protected places where they can spend their days. And there's a larva shedding its skin, taken by John Tyler. Here's what we would all love to see, a hillside covered with glowworms. I took this back in the early 90s of a site called Aston Rowant, which, if you have ever driven along the M40 between London and Oxford, there's a bit where it cuts through the chalk escarpment of the Chilterns, and just above there, that's Aston Rowant Nature Reserve. And I have counted many dozen, up to a couple of hundred there on a good night. But these days, I don't see this appearance where there are just so many. This was taken in the 1990s, and the numbers appear to be less. And I'll be coming along to the factors that affect the decline later on. But the typical number you will see is not that sort of thing. You don't usually see dozens or hundreds on a particular site. You may see 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 if you're lucky, and it is possible to see 50 to 100. Stockbridge Down in Hampshire is a place where they regularly count 100 to 150 on a good night, but normally they're much more spread out than that, and you might get them on a large site. You might count 100 to 150, but the population density, this gives a fairly good idea of you can see there's a small group of 2 or 3. You may get 2 or 3 together. Possibly they all find the same hidey hole in which to pupate, and so you may see a few together, but more often than not, they are spread out much more widely. And if you read Thomas Hardy, there's there's one of his novels, I forget which one it is. The name title has escaped my mind at the moment, but where, interestingly, and this was Hardy was writing his novels in the late 19th century about the early 19th century, and he said that the night fell as a group of people were playing dice, and they wanted to carry on their game, and they looked around them as the night fell, and they said glowworms, and they spent a few minutes searching and managed to gather a dozen glowworms. Now, this says to me that very high populations weren't all that common even in the 19th century. So the idea that glowworms were absolutely all over the place in days gone by or nights gone by is probably not the case. In some cases, they could be absolutely everywhere. In the village where I live, which is now a sort of semi-suburban village on the outskirts of High Wycombe, people back in the early 50s say they used to sit in their front garden and watch the glowworms on the other side of the road all glowing away. You don't see that these days. They've all been got rid of by the urbanization, and in particular by the street lights. Glowworm populations are often very sedentary, by which I mean that if someone reported glowworms on a particular hill or in a particular roadside lane 40, 50 years ago, you can very often find them in exactly the same spot now, and they don't spread very easily. Quite why this is, I don't know, but it does suggest there is something about certain areas that glowworms love, and that's another reason why it is not a good idea to try and move them from one place to another. There is something about sites which they like, and other places which to us appear almost identical. Just chalk grassland is a good site, but there are areas, as in Aston Row, which which you're looking at now, there are areas where they just never go, and other areas where they're always common. So don't expect to see them everywhere. There's the pupa of the female and male, and you see the male is the smaller one there. Adult females and larvae look quite similar. There's the larva at the top. You can tell the larva because it's got these pinky or sometimes yellowy spots on the edges of its abdomen, and it's a sort of darker colour. The adult female about the same size, but it lacks those spots on the edges of its segments, and it's more of a browny colour, and it's got a bit of a line down its back. Otherwise, they can be easily confused. So if you see the upper one and it's by day, it's almost certainly a larva. In fact, I've never had a a definite report of an adult female being seen during the day. And there again is a picture of the female and the male. Neither sex can feed as adults. They don't have mouth parts, and this is very important because it means that that's one reason why you need to leave them as they are. They don't have an awful lot of energy available. They're not like some butterflies which can feed as they migrate and fly from Central America up to North America over thousands of miles. No, that doesn't happen in the case of glowworms. They can't feed as adults, so that the resources which they have garnered during their lifetime as larvae have got to last them throughout their adult phase. And in some cases, this may be a day or two before they find each other and mate, and then they lay their eggs. The male may well go on to find other females, but the females have possibly only got a limited lifetime. And incidentally, those that we see later on in the season are almost always females. Males tend to appear at the beginning of the season, sometimes in swarms, and they tend to appear a week or so after the females start to appear on a particular site, and then you get a lot of males appearing. And occasionally they can appear in swarms, and they are attracted to lights. They've always been attracted to lighted windows, candles, even in the past, and that's to some extent their downfall. And light pollution is a possible problem, but it may be that we can make use of this in some way. So limited lifetime, 14 to 28 days, maybe a bit longer in some cases. The males are reluctant flyers. They don't have all those reserves to go flying around. They fly usually fairly close to the surface, a metre or so. I have seen them a bit higher up, maybe about a couple of meters, and people have seen them up at tree height, but normally they don't fly very far or very high. And that means that the ones that are hatched out on a particular site are very unlikely to fly to another site. I don't know what the limit is of a male's flight. It may be half a kilometre. I don't know. Nobody has managed to do this sort of experiment. It's quite a difficult thing to do. They don't fly, the males don't fly in cold weather, possibly below about 12 degrees, and the females tend not to appear in very cold weather. About 9 degrees is the limit. Below 9 degrees, they're unlikely to appear, but otherwise they don't mind a bit of rain, they don't mind a bit of wind, and as long as it's above about 9 to 11 degrees, they will start to appear. And this can mean that the numbers of females on the site can build up as the females appear, and the males don't, because they can't fly when it's very cold. And so the numbers of females can build up, and that has led to one of the reasons for you getting a large number of females on the site. I'll show you an example of that. Habitats. What defines a suitable habitat? If I knew, I'd have all the answers, because this is the best I can give you to a sort of place where you might find glowworms. It's the sort of thing that Cranbourne Chase is full of, not so much the London Wildlife Trust area, but it's defined by, I would say, poor soils. This is why you tend not to get glowworms all over East Anglia, where it's very arable, or you do get them in Devon, which is also an arable area, but more of a pasture land area, I guess. But Wiltshire should be, and the Cranbourne Chase area should be full of them, but surprisingly few sightings are seen, surprisingly few sites throughout the Wiltshire and Dorset area, considering the kind of soils you get. Here in the Chilterns, we have a lot of them, and I don't know quite why they are underreported, if it's underreported in Wiltshire, or it's just that there are fewer of them. So that's one reason why we want you to get out there and look for them, see if you can find them. It's true that Wiltshire and Dorset are fairly underpopulated compared with the Chilterns, so that may have something to do with it. Here's another shot of the Aston Rowan site, and that river of light you can see in the background is actually the M40, and there's the light of Oxford in the background. That's the glow over Oxford, and you see them dotted over the hillside there. The garden, we do call them a grassland species in the UK, but on the continent they think of them as a woodland species in the clearings of woodland. And let's face it, in times gone by, before humans started clearing a lot of the woodland, Britain was predominantly a woodland area, but you get them in the clearings particularly. And I'll tell you a story about the fact that there were none. I had no reports of glowworms from Savernake Forest near Marlborough, and I got a group of people to go and look for them. And actually going out, and a lot of people won't go into Savernake Forest at night for reasons of safety. I don't think it's that dangerous a place at all, but people just don't wander about it at night so much. And they found that one of the rides, one of the open areas, had glowworms dotted all the way alongside it. So from having no reports from Savernake Forest, we suddenly one survey got quite a few sightings. So it just goes to show that going out and looking for them can have results, but not just in the grassland, but also in woodland. So bear that in mind. As for habitats, they've got a huge, wide range of habitats. They are seen on chalk downland, as we have in the Cranbourne Chase area. Roadside verges, not just in Cranbourne Chase, but around Devon, Surrey, Sussex, Buckinghamshire. There are places where you can see them on the roadside verges. Railway lines. Now, this is a major place for looking for glowworms. Obviously, you cannot go onto the live line. Do not go onto the live line. £1,000 fine, probably get killed, so don't do it. But there are plenty of footpaths alongside the railway lines, or you can often look over the edge and see them just as easily as if you were walking along the line itself. And adjacent to railway lines, it is the case that about a third of all the sites that I know of are within a few hundred meters of a railway line. That's a very obvious correlation. And of course, the whole of Britain is threaded with dismantled railway lines. And I told you that they are sedentary species. They can often remain on the track of a former dismantled line long after the ballast has been pulled up, the track has gone, and it's just a green lane, and everything's changed completely, or even in some cases turned into gardens. There is a site I know in Suffolk where gardens have taken over the railway line, houses being built, and there are still glowworms along the former track. So that's what I'm saying about being sedentary. They love that area. Rural gardens, there are plenty of people with glowworms in the gardens, often not noticed because they tend not to go out at night so much. And if they do, they might have bright lights and those very, very annoying lights that shine all over the entire area, and they might not notice they're glowworms. So don't give up on your own garden. You might have some in your garden. Fairies at the bottom of your garden, or glowworms possibly. Coastal paths, all around the southwest coast path and in Dorset coast path, there are glowworms. Quarries, another good site. Woodland, as I've mentioned, and glowworms love railways. Here's a site near me. This is the line between Maidenhead and Marlow. A train runs along called the Marlow Donkey, and this you can get glowworms. You can see I'm cross here quite legally, and you can get glowworms on the ballast there, or in the or on this roadside verge. And the other side of that crossing there is actually the River Thames, and there's a hill on the other side. And so along the little patch outside there, I get glowworms. So if you are in doubt as to where you might find glowworms, and if there's a disused railway line near you, that's the first place I would try, because they love them. And as I say, although the ballast is a good site for the larvae and the glowworms, it's not essential. There is a story that that's the limestone in the ballast that attracts the mollusks, and therefore is good for glowworms. And that's a good story, but unfortunately ballast is not limestone. Limestone would be a terrible stone to make ballast out of, because as you probably know, it just dissolves in rain, and so the tracks would settle after a while. All the stone that I've seen on ballast is actually granite, so that's a bit of a myth. And it's not always the case that glowworms are to be found on along grass and in wild areas. This is an oddity. This is a hotel called Danesfield in between Henley and Marlow, and this is the grass surrounding the car park. It's well mown. There is lighting on the car park, as you see there, and you can't see it very well here, but there are glowworms dotted all over the car park at Danesfield. I have no idea why they are still found there, but I found them for years, and you can go there and in late July find 10 or 20 glowworms around the car park with lighting there. And I think there is a fatal attraction, if you like, between light and glowworms, in that this is yet to be proved, so this is just my theory. A glowworm, either male or female, when looking for a place to pupate, would like to have a fairly open area. And that's why railway lines are good, because they are rarely covered with trees. Now, you might think that glowworms would like dark areas, but this is not the case. They like an open area where the males can fly and spot the females. So both males and females will try and find an area where there's a bit of open sky. My suggestion is that it's the lights from houses, street lights, and in this case the car park, that pull them into thinking that there is open sky. Well, there is open sky there, but they think, well, that's a good place to go because it's nice and bright, and therefore that must be a bit of open sky. So that tends to attract the females, and so that's why we see so many females there. However, the presence of lighting could easily stop the males from seeing them. Actually, they're more easily visible to our eyes, because our eyes are sensitive to different colors, than they are to the glowworm's eyes, which are more monochromatic. And if I haven't done it, but if I to turn a picture of a bit of grassland with glowworms on it into monochrome, they're much more difficult to spot. We can see the green color, but when all the tones are the same with monovision, they're much more difficult to pick out. And there's a bit of research just been published by Jeremy Niven about, which was lab research, which showed that in the presence of increasing amount of light, males found it more difficult to find females. I am always a bit careful about laboratory research. It's often the only way to do these things, but it's only experiments in the field which you can really be sure, and on large numbers, that can give you the real answers about what glowworms like and don't like. But it is certainly true that I have never seen, although I know a site where there was a street light directly over an area of where I saw dozens, literally dozens of glowworms, about 40 in an area about the size of a tennis court, a bit of grass, and there was an orange street light over it, and I could count that it was almost impossible to walk there without treading on a glowworm, that many. But I never saw a male glowworm with any of the females, apart from right at the edges. So there is a lot to be said for that idea that male glowworms cannot find the females where there's a lot of light pollution. Site management. This is again Aston Rowant, and this, as you see, has got a mosaic of open areas and maybe more weedy areas. And that's what we aim for when, that's the only thing I can tell you about how to manage glowworms. A mosaic of open areas for the adults and weedy areas where snails and slugs thrive for the larvae. But don't let it become overgrown. If you've got a disused railway line in the area, letting it become overgrown, a tangle is no good for anything really, apart from, well, maybe a few species would like a tangle, but not glowworms. They do like open areas. Another story, Tewkesbury, about in the early 90s, there was a plan to, Tewkesbury up in Gloucestershire, there was a plan to build a bypass around the town along the line of a disused railway line. And a lot of the townspeople were dead against this. You would think that a bypass they would like, but they said, no, we love this railway line because it's a lovely footpath. It's got all sorts of wildlife on it, and in particular glowworms. And the Friends of the Earth in Tewkesbury got very hot under the collar about it, as you can imagine. And there was a lot of quite acrimonious debate about it. And in the end, the bypass was never built. A lot of the townspeople said we don't actually need a bypass anyway. And it was just an excuse to build a supermarket along the line. But that's another matter. However, what they didn't do was to keep the railway line free of vegetation. You need management for something like that. And John Tyler, whose pictures I've been showing you, said what they should do with that is buy a really bad-tempered goat and let it just keep the vegetation down. And they didn't, of course, but they've now lost all their glowworms. Or there's probably still one or two, but nothing like the 100 or so that they used to record. So don't let it become overgrown if you've got a glowworm site. Maybe a broken up soil structure. Rabbits are probably a good thing for a glowworm site because they do a lot of scraping and so on. And an old farmer I once met in Hambledon said to me that he reckoned that the reason you don't see as many glowworms along the roadside verges is because myxomatosis killed off all the rabbits. And at one time the roadside verges were kept down by the rabbits, but now the rabbits a lot of them have gone, and so the roadside verges have grown up, and the glowworms have gone as well. Unimproved grassland, in other words, not with fertilizers and so on, is a good site for them, and that is about the best we can say about the sort of habitat they like. Don't try to analyze the soil, the plant species where you find glowworms. This is a favorite occupation of undergraduate dissertations, to say, right, let's characterize the habitat of a particular species, and they spend a few happy hours on a sunny day writing down, identifying all the wildflowers on the site and saying this is what the glowworms like. But then, as I've said, there are so many habitats, from sand dunes to quarries to moorland, oh, you name it, there are glowworms virtually everywhere, apart really from ploughed fields and acres of wheat, that that you can't really characterize the plant species where you find glowworms. Low intensity grazing, probably yes, but not the improved grassland that you get throughout places like Devon. Of course, we all know that there's a great lack of insects these days, flying insects. I drove down to Devon just a couple of weeks ago, not a single splat on the windscreen. And yet when I was a kid in the 50s and 60s, you would have to stop halfway around sort of Taunton Way and get the chap who filled your petrol tank would offer to clean your windscreen because there were so many splats on the windscreen. Forget this theory that it's the aerodynamic nature of cars. I think, well, the number plate has no splat either. And so we have lost a lot of insects. Now, down in Devon, you might think the grassland is is as it was, and it's nice and lush and green, but they put huge amounts of fertilizers on that grassland to make it suitable for the cattle. And so unimproved grassland, it's only places like Cranbourne Chase, which are probably less, and even then the more wild areas, probably less treated with fertilizers than, say, Devon. It may look the same as it did, but down in Devon and such areas in Somerset, but they have got a lot of pesticides and fertilizers on the land. So low intensity grazing is probably okay, sheep, cattle, but not so intense that it's that the grass is heavily fertilized. Rabbits I've already mentioned, and if you have a glowworm site, yes, mow it if necessary. Roadside people get worried about mowing a site where there are glowworms, but it's not a bad thing to get it mown. And the one I mentioned nearby where I am, where there were 40 glowworms in the area of a tennis court, that was actually mown quite low, and yet there were still glowworms to be seen. And they don't mind, and of course that Danesfield Hotel, they don't mind mown lawns nearly so much as you might imagine, but don't mow the grass when it's wet so as to leave a dense thatch, because the glowworms just can't get through that when it sort of forms a solid mass. Factors affecting the decline, if any, of glowworms. I say if any because although I've been in the survey since the 1990s, I can't definitively prove that the numbers are going down, because the climate has a lot to do with it. And you could, back in the 90s, we had a period of drought. You may remember a lot of rivers dried up in the late 80s, and then it got wetter in the 90s, and that's when we saw good numbers of glowworms. So climatic changes could actually affect that. And so I think we have to be careful about attributing the decline to one particular thing, such as climate change. It could be that the climate will, that the downpours that we've had in the last few days, that's the sort of thing that might help glowworms. I don't know. But changing land use is a major factor, I'm sure. Habitat fragmentation, new housing estates going up all over the place, and the glowworms don't spread very easily, so they're separated out by roads and housing estates and so on. An example of this, here's a picture taken in 1910 of a site in the Chilterns, Whiteleaf Cross. You can see up here there's a chalk mark for the cross at the back, not far from Chequers actually. You can see that from Chequers, the Prime Minister's residence. And now that was covered with glowworms at the time, but recently there's the Whiteleaf Cross again, and these pictures taken by John Tyler. And you can see that the whole of that hillside has been covered now with vegetation. So that's the sort of thing that can kill off all the glowworms. They just do not like that sort of area. Chemical use, inevitably. Climate change, yes, probably. But when we're talking about the decline of insects, probably all of these have something to do with it. I am not sure that anybody is absolutely certain which of the various factors is responsible. And in the case of glowworms, they are regarded as something of a flagship species, really, because as nighttime insects that glow, they are much more visible than a lot of other things. You can have a whole field full of spiders and ants and beetles and all sorts of things crawling around, but it's only the glowworms at night that you'll see. So that's why they are quite useful for looking at the health of wildlife in an area. Light pollution is, as I've alluded to, also a possible problem. Another example of habitat changing. This is where I live, Flackwell Heath. This is a lane just down the road. Back in 2006, and I used to see glowworms all along that roadside verge there. And today, or not actually today, but these days, you can see how the vegetation has overgrown and it's starting to become a tunnel. And I just don't see any glowworms along there at all, partly because it's much more dangerous to walk along there. It's quite a high-speed lane, this, and I've got nowhere to jump to if I walk along there to get out of the way of the traffic. But I know from what I've looked at that there are very few, if any, glowworms along there now. So that's these days. Now, the glowworm survey and looking for glowworms. I first became interested in 1987 when I saw fireflies in a park overlooking Frankfurt. They were such a wonderful sight. I know many of you will have seen fireflies in Italy, maybe seen them in Southeast Asia or North America, and you've seen pictures of them. And I wondered, can we see fireflies in England? Everyone's heard of them. So I got in touch with the Natural History Museum. No internet in the late 80s, and you would have to have access to a specialist library to find out the information, really. And I got in touch with the Natural History Museum, and all they could send me was photocopies of records published by this chap, Anthony Wootton, in a magazine called Countryside, which is the magazine of the British Naturalists Association, still exists. In the 1970s, you can see the dates there, he asked for records of glowworms. And so he published lots of them. They're on my glowworm website if you want to find them. And here are the ones for Wiltshire and Dorset. Just south of Salisbury. Well, as I've said, there not a lot of use, but there probably are still found not just south of Salisbury, but without knowing exactly where, then it's not much help. And that's one thing that I want to emphasize, that we do need accurate records of where you see them, as precise as you can. Within 100 yards is fine, more precise if you can. And there's some other sites there where they were seen, but in Dorset, only a couple of sites where there are actual grid references given. And in fact, I think if you go back to that site now, I haven't checked, Durdledore, yes, Dulwich, yes, there's a campsite above that location. And until quite recently, I got reports of 9-10 glowworms along that stretch. I haven't had them recently, but I dare say they're still there, unless people have all carted them off to their homes in West Bromwich or Neasden or wherever, in the hopes of starting up new colonies of glowworms, because they were a bit vulnerable to people taking them away. But you can see back in 1968, only a fairly small number was seen there. Disused railway track between Bridport and West Bay, 31 in 1970. A year later, only 6 in 1971. That shows you that even back then, you had quite often boom or bust numbers of glowworms on a particular site. Or it could be that whoever looked only went out on one night in each year and happened to chance on a good night in 1970, and maybe a couple of weeks earlier in 1971 or a couple of weeks later, and only saw 6. So one look at a site isn't enough. You've really got to do it several times over the course of the season. Now, West Bexington, they've still got them. I don't know about, that's another site in Terence Rushton. I don't know whether they're still there. All these sites doesn't give much help. Portland Bill, yes, still seen there. We still get reports. Ringstead Bay, I think around there, yes, they are still seen. But again, the same thing applies. You've got to go at the right time. There are lots of sites on that historic list which need to be studied, and that's on my glowworm website. So it's because there seemed to be no recent records of where glowworms were to be found when I started looking in 1988. The first ones I found actually were by following this list in Devon, down at Hope Cove, and I first found my first glowworms there. then my wife and I started looking for them elsewhere. And then eventually we found some around in Cranbourne Chase, actually. And we thought, wow, we found them closer to home. That's really useful. And we found them around Gussage All Saints, along the lanes. And we still get reports from there, but I would like people to go and examine those lanes, and down towards Norton Ring, where there were about 20 I saw on one occasion around the ruined church there. And those lanes are a good place to look for glowworms. Don't drive along in your car, you won't see them. You've got to walk. And even the cycle you might miss them. So you've got to walk along. And we saw, it was a wonderful sight. You've got that lovely smell of new mown hay and the smells of summer. And on a late twilight summer evening in July, and every so often you would see glowworms on the side of the road, dotted like street lights, and not casting any glow on the road, of course, but nevertheless, in fact, at the lane in Flagwell Heath, the oldest residents told me that when they walked up during wartime up the hill from Woburn up to Flagwell Heath, they could found their way guided by the glowworms along the lane. That's now a high-speed road, and there are still glowworms along there, but I've counted up to 10 or 20, so they are still around, but only I know that they're there because nobody else walks along there or bothers to report them. So go along those lanes and see if they are still there and send in a report. And if you don't see them on one night, try another night. It's a lovely summer opportunity. Make sure you don't get run over. So back in 1990, as I said at the bottom there, I started the UK glowworm survey. First of all, by putting in a report into New Scientist, and I got a few replies. And then I got interviewed on Radio 4 on the Today programme on the Saturday, and that brought in a whole load of reports as well. And there was an article in BBC Wildlife in June 1991, wanted glowing accounts, and people sent in their reports to Wildlife magazine. And we got about 400 reports of glowworms. And that was really useful because that was back in 1991. And that's quite a long time ago now. And so over 30 years ago, we have a snapshot of the situation with glowworm, as the numbers of glowworms, what is now quite a long time ago, but it would be nice to get more reports of what they are like today. And as people use more light in the countryside than they ever did before, you really got to look for them. So that's why I started off the glowworm survey. Just going back a bit, wildlife reporting in the UK. This is the website of the NBN, from the National Biological Record Centre, National Biodiversity Network. And it actually starts off its website by saying, surprisingly, there's never been a statutory requirement for any one organisation to collect biological records on a long-term basis. And the BRC was set up in 1964 to collect data, but it wasn't until the early 90s that some effort was made to collect all the information together into something called the National Biodiversity Network. And of course, back in the early 90s, you didn't have websites, and now we do. And so it's now much more easy to find out where glowworms are to be found. When I started this out somewhat naively, I knew nothing about wildlife recording. Well, there were records being made by wildlife trusts, by county recorders, but how many people knew who their county recorders were of wildlife? And you needed to be a naturalist, a term which is not so much used these days if people talk about conservation and ecology and so on, but you can't do a degree in being a naturalist. It's more defined these days. But only the amateur naturalists who maybe joined their local natural history society found out how to record things, and quite a lot of local groups would record things and maybe publish them in their journal, and people thought, right, it's been recorded for posterity there, and the journals will go into their local library, but they're buried away in archives, if not thrown out years ago. The wildlife trusts have all been doing their own surveys. The National Trust does its surveys, but quite often I have to say that without a central reporting point, the information can get lost. The wildlife trusts are particularly keen on keeping their records these days because they are more valuable, but there is there are political dimensions to this, in that developers would often love to get their hands on the records, and the wildlife trusts, not surprisingly, charge developers for telling them where the great crested newts are, where the endangered species are, and it tends to be a bit more difficult for your amateur naturalist to get their hands on the record. And there are also individual surveys, such as the UK glowworm surveys. There are ladybird surveys, butterfly surveys, and all sorts of species have their own individual surveys. So there are lots of surveys being carried out, but until quite recently, they were not collated together, and that's what the National Biodiversity Network has sought to do. However, I should say. However, there's a bit of a mishmash of records on that, and I have to say that it's not as nice as it should be in terms of the accuracy of the records. However, they have, since in the last 5 or 6 years, started up something called iRecord, and that's now what I use. In the past, for my records, there's the website, which I started in 2000, and before that I relied on publicity in the magazines and so on, and I sent out reporting forms by post and all that sort of thing. But now there is a website which will tell you a lot about glowworms, and there are Facebook and Twitter feeds as well. I mentioned winter glowworms in trees. These are the laser projectors, which get reported a lot in December. We have got glowworms in our tree, fireflies in our tree. What date? Oh, December the 14th. No, sorry, those are laser projectors. No, they're not. I've seen them, but I'm afraid they are. So the website will tell you where to record them for me. But I know the Wildlife Trust would like you to record them for them as well. So that's something which you need to sort out with they're organising the volunteers. If you're not part of the Wildlife Trust organisation, then report them to me. This used to be my reporting form on paper, but I recorded on a very complicated system called MapMate, which was almost impossible to export from. But nowadays I use iRecord. Most of my reports come from the public, so it's a real citizen science effort. I require at least a 6-figure map reference for the reasons which I've mentioned. Numbers and dates seen are the minimum that I require, and the weather conditions it's useful to know, and details of the site it's very useful to know, and also whether it's private or publicly accessible. And that's where on the current glowworm reporting form on our record, we say, is this site sensitive? Only say it's sensitive if it is on private land. Don't be worried that people come along and steal the glowworms. Although I've been saying that this is a bit of a risk, by and large, people do not come along and steal glowworms. They don't look at the website to find out where they can find glowworms. They steal them through ignorance, but there's a much greater danger to a glowworm site from people who don't know about glowworms than those who do. And presence and distance of lighting we want to know as well. Grazing and presence of nearby water, whether it's a damp site or not. And that's now changed. The National Recorder, we don't report to him anymore, but we did in the past. As I say, I used to record on a system called MapMate, and that shows you where all the records I had for North Wales and Cheshire came from. So you can see they're dotted all over the country. Now, however, we use iRecord, which is run by the Biological Records Centre, and you can just go to irecord.org.uk and you can record on their basic recording form or on the specific glowworm recording form, which you can find under record. And this is the information that we want. We want your name, date. You do need to register. You won't get lots of spam as a result. Don't worry. There are no ads. It's just so that you can be recognised again, and we can get back in touch with you. Date of observation time, conditions, temperature, how many females, how many males, how many larvae, or even if you don't find any, you expect it to, there's a tick box there. The next page, there's the great thing about iRecord is that you can scroll in on map. This shows Martin down here, and you scroll in right to the very finest detail and locate exactly where you saw the glowworms if you can. It's something we want. Is the location publicly accessible? Yes or no? And is it sensitive? And if it's on private land, you can say no. If it's sensitive for that reason, you can blur the record to 1 kilometre, but I do ask people to record to the nearest 6 figures of the grid reference rather than just giving a kilometre grid reference square, because it's virtually impossible to find a site for glowworms to the nearest kilometre. If you got them to 100 metres, you can find them again. And then I ask what sort of type of site it is, and if it's grazed and all that sort of thing, insecticides and presence of nearby lighting. We get about 500 reports a year, and about half of them are newly reported sites. So there are plenty of sites out there for you to find. About a third are near a railway. Habitats, well, I've been through that before. And I've mentioned that before, but I'm not denying that there is a decline. It's just that evidence needs to be based on long-term results, and the likelihood is that they are in decline. But I still get sites where they reported where they've never been seen previously, so all is not lost. So your call to action is that I want you to check out previously reported sites, and I've told you where to find them. You can also go to iRecord, and if you log into iRecord, you can find out where they have been seen near you. And there's also a blog that I maintain, and I also want you to find new sites. And that is very much the aim of the surveys which are being carried on in London and in Cranbourne Chase. Now here's the iRecord site, and if you I haven't shown you the top menu, but this shows you the sites where sorry, I haven't got the right sites here, but you can click on the site. This is Cranbourne Chase here. You will be able to click on a location and find the exact position, or a near kilometre if it's on a private site. So that's how you find sites. In the London area, this is where sites are found. This is one I discovered near Denham, one near Hounslow, near Feltham. That's one site that needs to be confirmed. Mitcham Common. I know there's a whole string of sites on this East Coast line here, the one that goes up to Norwich, around Hornchurch, and I don't know how recent those records are. This odd one here from Stoke Newington is a one-off. A chap photographed one, and it was definitely a glowworm, female glowworm, but that was almost certainly an import in a flower plant that had been purchased from a garden centre somewhere nearby, and it would have been a glowworm's. The glowworm would have found its way into the pot, probably as a larva, and then hatched out. But there is no glowworm site in the middle of London like that. Not even on Richmond, in Richmond Park or Bushy Park. which you would think would be wild areas, but they'd never been seen there. So around the fringes of London, glowworms can be seen. And you can see out into Kent and in Buckinghamshire. This is where I live, and you can see I've got sites, that's me around there, in the Chilterns, plenty of sites to look for. And there's also a blog where we report, it hasn't been updated for a couple of weeks, I'm sorry to say, but it will be shortly. ukglowworms.blogspot.com. If you, this records where they have been seen, and about this time of year, the records are so numerous that it's difficult to keep up with them all. When recording a site, what I want you to do is to go out and look for glowworms. And the crucial thing, this is an actual record using a GPS of the paths that I took at a site called Brush Hill in the Chilterns. And these are waypoints where the glowworms were to be found. And Brush Hill, I'll mention in a minute, was a very, very prolific site in 2007, 2008. But the things I want you to do is to use a standard route, or as it's technically called, a transect, and use the same technique each time. Don't wander around at random to find them, but walk along a specific path if you can. Don't worry that you might be missing a few. It's important to stick to a standard route. Then you can get comparable results. But include areas where glowworms are not seen. If you stick just to the areas where they are, then and they're known to be, then you might miss a whole area where they have appeared and you've missed them. Count the numbers of females and males. Males you will probably only find with the females, and larvae, as I've described, you may see those glowing very briefly as they search around for snails. And keep a record as you go. Try and keep it fairly, on a large site as this one, try and, if you've got a GPS, or the iRecord app will allow you to record on the spot, and it will record your actual GPS location. But the trouble is, quite often if people have got if there's no good signal where they are, it might not actually report in for some minutes afterwards. So the GPS, a proper GPS, is better than using a phone app, I think, and will record to within a meter or a few meters, 10 meters or so. And you can see there was a bit of dearth of them there, and they were in two or three separate areas on this particular site. If you go too early in the evening, the time to go is when you lose your colour vision in the landscape. And that means when you can no longer see that the grass is green, and you no longer see that someone's wearing a red jumper or whatever. This occurs about 10:30 at night at this time of year. And you'll see that actually everything is in monochrome, apart from if you switch on a torch or whatever. But by the natural ambient light, you lose your colour vision. And if you go too early, you will miss the late starters. Don't go along at 9:30 and expect to see them. They won't be there 10 o'clock. And this is one problem. People want to take children out to enjoy the glowworms, but it means a late bedtime. So don't expect to see them at exactly 10:30. You need to stay up a bit longer. They will glow for maybe an hour or maybe a couple of hours, or until they're mated. So if you leave it too late, if you leave it till midnight, then some of them may well have stopped glowing, and you will miss the late. You will only see the late ones that haven't mated. You may want to check each female for males by torchlight. It doesn't. We've no evidence that shining a torch briefly on them affects them. They still carry on glowing. So that's what a lot of most people will normally do. GPS waymarks can be very helpful if you've got a GPS. What is it? I'll just gallop through this. The extent of a single population. This is the area. I live just, let me see, there's the M40. I live just here. As you can see, not near me, but there's the golf course. Down at the bottom of the golf course, plenty. There's a cemetery here where I see them. There's a that's the site where I told you I can see. I've seen 40 in a small area along the disused railway line here. I see them, and it carries on down there, and then down there into Bourne End. And along here, this is the site where I showed you that level crossing, and around gravel pits, plenty there. A good site there. And here there are some where that's the lane. This is the lane where I said it's now become rather covered with trees. But down the lower part, then I've also got them. I did this a few on one summer before I had recorded those. So also one or two there. Yeah, I've recorded one or two there. So that gives you the picture of the fact that that they're very isolated. And if you were to look in all of these areas and not see one, admittedly, I haven't been over all those areas, but once you get outside an area, you tend not to see many. You might wander through Cranbourne Chase for miles and not see one, and then all of a sudden you'll come across half a dozen. So that shows you the sort of thing that you need to be aware of, that they're not they're often very isolated. Counting males, inspect the females. LEDs will lure males, even a red cycle light. You would think, why red? But actually red lights do attract them. And that's one reason why the red street, the orange street lights can attract male glowworms. And the site in Sherwood Forest, there were 6 females on the 3rd of June 2011, but 17 males appeared. And so that shows that's an example of the swarm of males. I've seen 40 glowworms attracted to a light on a site where only a handful of females were seen. Now, I don't like doing that because only use a light briefly, and it's useful to use a lure, a green LED, or maybe a red light to see if there are males on the site that you haven't checked before, but don't use it to attract large numbers of males. Their job is to find the females, not to find your lights. So use them only briefly, and then they should be okay. They may, whether they will find their way back to the females, we don't know. There's a lot we don't know about glowworms. And this was a system used by a researcher for her dissertation called Stephanie Bell in 2007 on Brush Hill. She put an LED inside a plastic cup, and that was the system that she used. And there you go. That's her dissertation diagram of how she did it. 30 centimeters above the ground. And this is the number that she recorded at Brush Hill in 2007, I think it was, as I think she counted about 250 on that site. That is extraordinary. The only greater number that has been recorded, much greater number, was 890 at Great Orme in Llandudno, a great limestone outcrop in on the edge of Llandudno. A lot of you may know it. And that was recorded by Jenny Cox in about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a bit more. Oh, that's Brush Hill again. 262 females. 2000. I think Chris Packham got to know about this and took a film crew along as well. Remember that we're only counting the unmated females, the unsuccessful ones. Therefore, a lot of females doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good site. But on the other hand, if there are a lot of females, then there are obviously a lot of glowworms around. So seeing a lot on one site is not necessarily a good thing. Since then, since 2008, when 100 odd were recorded on Brush Hill, only a handful have been recorded each night. John Tyler does a lot of records there each year, and he's lucky if he gets more than half a dozen or a dozen. And so those big numbers, only recorded comparatively recently, 2007, 2008, were the number has declined since then. But as I showed you earlier on, back in the past, numbers were often quite small as well. So that's why I'm reluctant to say that that the age of large numbers on the site has gone. It may depend on peculiar circumstances. And in this case, when Steph Bell did her survey, it was because she did surveys in late June and it was particularly cold. The nights were very cold. The females appeared, but the males didn't. And the number of females built up and up and up until the nights warmed up. And then the males appeared, swarms of them, and the number of females went down. So if you went the last week in June, you might have seen a couple of hundred. If you went the second week in July, you would have seen just a handful. So numbers vary with weather conditions, good and bad years. Females may remain for many nights in more or less the same spot. And on a large site, the one at Sherwood Forest, Trevor Pendleton recorded that something like 80% appear for one night only and then found a mate. So there's a wide variation in habitat, in habits in glowworms. These are the numbers recorded by Steph Bell, 283, 300 on one night on the 6th of July, 314. And then that was what year, I don't know. Glowworms and light pollution. This is a map of light pollution, very bright in London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, and so on. Much darker as you get into the West Country. This is a map of glowworm sites overlaid on the map of light pollution. Here's the Chilterns, here's Wiltshire. As you can see, why are there so few there? Not much light pollution. You can't blame light pollution particularly. There's a difference between the sky glow caused by light pollution, which astronomers hate. It spoils the view of the Milky Way, and the nearby light pollution caused by a street light. So there's the sky glow, which is what an astronomer would call light pollution, but then there's light nuisance, which is the nearby lighting, and that's often a problem for glowworms. Oh, this is the area where I could record huge numbers of glowworms. That mown bit still has them, but the fairly short grass here, I used to get something like 40 glowworms. And here's the nighttime view as you look around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Difficult to. This is when the grass had grown up a bit. There's one there. So that is an unusual sight. But as you can see, there was a bright orange street light over illuminating that. That's since been changed to a white one, and I don't see nearly as many. Jenny Coxon then found that the orange sodium lamps were interrupting the mating patterns of the males, and she found a lot of males just wandering around dazed and confused underneath the orange street lights at the bottom of Marine Drive. And it was on the hillside above here where she recorded that 800 odd female glowworms. But that was a bit of work which she started off, and the local council did some experimentation with different coloured street lights and found that the glowworms just weren't bothered by the white street lights, the LED ones, but were very attracted to the red ones, the orange ones. Long story that. Things we would like to know: quantify the decline, establish some causes for the decline, establish the effects of light on glowworms. That's why I want to know whether there's lighting nearby, and try and identify what makes the habitat suitable for glowworms, local conditions and site management. And so the more records we have, the better. And so to finish up, there's my own glowworm site, www.glowworms.org.uk. Usually just put glowworms in and that site comes up. There's a blog, ukglowworms.blogspot.co.uk. That's Facebook, Twitter, and there's the reporting form. So that's me done, and I see there's lots of Q&As. So Anna, would you like to come in now and mastermind the Q&A?
Yeah, I'll go through the Q&As. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was so interesting. Definitely want to find some new sites for glowworms. So we've got 11 questions. So the first question is, so with the glowing eggs, are they all females or are they a mixture of females and males?
No idea. No idea.
No.
The only person who might answer that question is Martin Dale, who has got a captive population. And
Okay.
but I don't know. It's quite
No,
possible
I'm
that
sure.
they are one or the other. How should I tell the difference between the glowworm larvae and ladybird larvae? Look at the glowworm website. There are pictures of both, glowworms.org.uk, and I've got pictures of both. Why are they called worms? There are other worm-like creatures that glow. Yes, indeed, there are. Funny enough, they're called glowworms in several European languages: German, Glühwürmchen, French, Ver-Louison. And so I think it's because the nature of them, when you see a larvae crawling along, it uses its rear end. In fact, it's more like a caterpillar to help itself along. But that is one of the odd things. I do not know a definitive answer to that. There are local names for glowworms, but they are called glowworms in several languages. And there are indeed worm-like creatures that glow. Very much more rare. There are geomorphous caterpillars, centipedes, I should say. I forget the name of them, but there is a species of caterpillar. Of centipede that does glow, and they're much longer glows. They don't have the same appearance of two very bright glows remaining more or less constant. You will see them marching along and the whole thing glows. There are also luminous earthworms about which very little is known, and you would think that I would get reports of them, but I've had one report of a luminous earthworm over 30 years and about half a dozen reports of the centipedes, but regular glowworms are much more common. Shall I carry on with the others? I can read them. How often do they feed?
Okay.
Do they scare their meal with other glowworms? Can't imagine one glowworm being able to eat a snail on their own. Actually, I think they can clean out a snail by its. Yes, I think probably others find the snail as they're going along. You often do find several larvae within one snail. Exactly how they find the snails is not known. I've seen a glowworm larva within a couple of inches of a snail, and it didn't seem to know it was there. How it come across them, I do not know. But at the same time, you will find snail shells with lots of larvae inside. And on one of the earlier last year's Attenborough programs, I forget the name of it, there was footage of a glowworm larva inside a snail. So and just a single one. So I think they will probably eat their fill and then leave it for others. Will they like a wildflower meadow? Yes, they will, probably. But as I've said, there's no one wildflower species that they appreciate. So you will, again, this is something about exactly what habitat requirements they have. A wildflower meadow as such isn't something that will attract them, but there must be other factors that we don't really understand. And there is a lot of scope there for people with the right qualifications to study the sites. Maybe it's soil pH, maybe it's soil structure, maybe it is microclimate. There is a lot we don't know. And this, incidentally, is why some of the attempts at so-called rewilding are a bit controversial, because they are taking glowworms from sites where they are known and putting them onto sites where they have never been known. And this is really not a good idea. They're not rewilding, they're trying to introduce them to new sites. And whether this will be So again, don't take your glowworms and try and introduce them into your garden. There is far more to the glowworm habitat than we realise. Thank you. How many females can one male mate? We don't know. Something else that needs to be established. And someone asked, you mentioned glowworm vision is face downwards. What causes that? It's because there are other sources of light in the night sky, such as the moon and even bright stars. Actually, if you look at the night sky and you see a field full of glowworms, the brightest stars are equally as bright, if not brighter, than the glowworms. So you don't want the glowworm flying off to Betelgeuse or, well, it won't. Betelgeuse is visible at the wrong time of year. Antares or Vega or Aquila or Altair, you want, or the moon, you want them to look at the glowworms on the ground. So I think that's the reason why they wear this sort of baseball cap over their head. Have I covered all the? You had glowworms observed at Norton in Wiltshire. Is that Norton near Malmesbury? I don't know. This is the trouble with the old. Yeah, I missed out one or two. That is the trouble with the old records, that not only did they not give map records, but I don't know which site that was. It was just recorded by Wootton. Someone sent in the details. He didn't seem to ask questions about exactly where. He just published the records. So if you know a place called Norton in Wiltshire, then maybe there are glowworms still there. How would they feel about living in a log pile? Loads of snails and crevices there. People often find them in compost heaps. And so the garden site is often a good thing. Is the presence of empty snail shells a possible indicator? Quite possibly. I know that someone was a bit worried in the Chilterns when they found lots of Roman snail shells empty, and then they suspected the glowworms of cleaning them out. And so which one do you, the Roman snails are quite a rare species. So not necessarily a good thing, but yes, that could well be the reason for the empty snail shells. I don't know what else eats snails. There must be other things that will gladly tuck into the snail when they find it half eaten and left by another glowworm. You said at the beginning they don't. So this is from Layla again. You said at the beginning that they don't stop glowing when you see them, but later said that they stop glowing at the end of the night. Do they glow 24 hours until mated death? No, they don't. I should have mentioned this. When a female attracts a male, she actually, and he sort of, you will see him sort of hanging on to her, and she actually descends down into her hidey hole, carrying him with him. I often liken this when I'm doing a public talk to saying, she says to him, come back to my place for coffee, and off they go together. And she is turning off her light. She doesn't need to attract anymore. She's got her chap. So she will turn off her light after maybe an hour or two. Again, a human analogy. If kids go to what we used to call to a dance, and I don't know what they call them now, a rave or whatever, and if they haven't all scored by midnight, they just go home and try and get another night. And it's the same with the glowworms. They turn off their lights after about an hour and a half or two, and then all the activity is over, usually by about midnight, maybe 1 o'clock. And occasionally the female will start glowing again about 3 or 4 in the morning. I have heard this happen, but most humans are not around then, and it's quite unusual to get records from early morning, whether they are just confused or whatever, or just decided to try again. I do not know the answer to that. There's always a wide variation in any population, so maybe it's just down to chance. Have I answered all the questions there?
Yes, I think all of them have been covered now.
Thank you
Cool.
later.
Yeah. So I just thought I'd mention quickly that James, a master's student from the Bournemouth University, is actually doing his dissertation on Martin Down this year. So he on glowworms. So he is looking at how light pollution affects mate attraction in European glowworms. So that should be really interesting to find out his results, and I'm sure they'll be passed on to you.
Excellent. Yes, I think he's been in touch with me. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also, so with the Nurturing Nature project, after this glowworm talk, we are also running a walk on the 30th of June, starting at 9:45 at Martin Down Nature Reserve. So this is led by Maria from the Wilton Wildlife Group, and it's available to sign up to on our volunteer hub. But if you'd rather email me, my email address is annac@wsbrc.org. So if you'd like to find out more information and come along, just pop me an email and I can send you more details. That's great. And all of those websites and blogs are available. And Ruth has risen her hand. Let me see if I can put you on. I think you can now talk.
Hi,
I
Anna.
think. Hello.
Just wanted to say, could you repeat your email address, please?
Yes, I'll put it in the chat. Might be a good idea. It's annac@wsbrc.org. Hopefully you should be able to see. So hold on, let me try that again. Can you see that? It's in the
I
chat.
can see it. Yes, yes.
Yeah. So just send me an email if you want more details. But no, thank you again, Robin. It was very informative. And
There's just one
hopefully,
last thing I'd like to say
Yeah.
to all the volunteers, and that is that please be persistent. A lot of people love to see a glowworm, and there is a bit of a habit of once someone has seen a glowworm and maybe 2 or 3 more, they think, right, I've seen my glowworms, that's it. I'd like people to be explorers and be persistent and look around for others. So if you find a glowworm, look around. Please don't be a one-trick pony. Please go and find out some more. That's what we really need. True citizen scientists who can do some exploring, even if the results aren't beneficial to you each time. We even need to know the sites where they're not seen as well as where they are seen. So if you don't see one, don't give up. Please be persistent and give you and do a proper survey rather than just satisfying your desire to see a glowworm. That's what I would really like. Just to do the job fully as much as you can.
Yeah, that's great. And remember to send all your records in as well, because we'll be really interested to see them. But yeah, one last time, thank you again, Robin. And I hope everyone has a good evening. I shall stop the recording and the webinar now. Hopefully see you at the walk if you're available.
Good hunting, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.